Well, Sonnet 6, the second half of Sonnet 5, so realistically probably watch Sonnet 5, otherwise you're not going to really know what's going on here, are you? Because it's a two-parter sonnet. Newsflash, sorry about that. Also, watch the opening intro video as well, that explains everything, because unless you magically know what a quatrain or a couplet is, you're going to be a bit confused. Anyway, on to Sonnet 6. Then let not winter's ragged hand deface in thee thy summer, ere thou be distilled. Make sweet some vial, treasure thou some place with beauty's treasure, ere it be self-killed. That use is not forbidden usury, which happies those that pay the willing loan. That's for thyself to breed another thee, or 10 times happier, be it 10 for 1. 10 times thyself were happier than thou art, if 10 of thine 10 times refigured thee. Then what could death do if thou shouldst depart, leaving thee in posterity? Be not self-willed, for thou art much too fair to be death's conquest, and make worms thine heir. As promised, this sonnet continues almost directly on from the last. The literal first word is a connective that frames the entire sonnet as the natural consequence of the one that came before. We're back to the more standard affair, however, when it comes to address. Shakespeare is continuing to lecture the fair youth about having babies. Hooray! God, I was almost worried there for a second. It continues in the early part of the poem to follow the seasons metaphor, but functions much more as a solution to the problem set up in Sonnet 5, rather than, just complaining about it. A practical poem, you might say. Again, it's pretty standard on a structural front. The 3 quatrains are self-defined and thematically quite tight, at least compared to the previous sonnets that we've been looking at. The first quatrain essentially continues the distillation theme of Sonnet 5, but with specific reference to the fair youth. It implores him to make some vial or perfume of his beauty before he gets distilled, or perhaps, more stingingly, self-killed. Shakespeare really goes in on the narcissism of the fair youth not having any children. Also, interesting to notice how that lines 2 and 4 are extremely similarly constructed, and they're saying essentially the same thing, just more harshly the second time around, in order to really emphasise this point about the youth being selfish. The second quatrain actually references another sonnet we've already looked at, number 4. It utilises a financial-based language, the same we see in that poem. It encourages him to take the investment or loan of children because in the long term it will make him much happier. 10 times happier if the poem is to be believed. Shakespeare teaching financial responsibility in his poems. What a sensible guy. This idea of being 10 times happier carries on directly into the third quatrain. Shakespeare doubles down that 10 more of himself, i.e. 10 children, would make the fair youth happier, which, 10, that's a lot of kids. Slightly overkill, if you ask me, but, Elizabethans had really large families back in those days, so who am I to judge? The final couplet is a nice, succinct closing of the poem, carrying directly on from the final quatrain. It essentially repeats the argument we've already heard before, that he's just too beautiful to be left alone, and death would be the only thing he leaves behind if he didn't have kids. There's also a nice legal pun in there as well. Be not self-willed, as in last will and testament, because your heirs otherwise will be worms. The people who receive your wealth and land will actually, literally, be the worms that Shakespeare talks about. So, there you go. One of the tighter poems, at least from a literary standpoint. Very succinct and well-formed in its arguments, if perhaps less flowery than some of the others. As I said before, it doesn't stand as well on its own as Sonnet 5 does, but it's arguably better from a literary standpoint. Regardless, they make a lovely pair. But soon we're back to the normal ones that are just, one on their own, and I'll hopefully see you then. Anon.
Alack the day when one begins to beg, when the powers above thou hast to bribe, but if thou this fine channel wish to peg, then, good fellows, I implore you, subscribe. Alas, but still thou shalt not be informed if this author a tale he has to tell. My heart would thus be eternally warmed, if like cries of yore, thou ring'st the bell. Last, if thou finds an item thou dost enjoy, allow me yet another deal to strike. Thine patronage I would seek to employ, therefore, fine friend, feel free to drop a like. But now we end, and I wish thee luck, and pray thou friends, forgive this rambling